Today's guest is Kathy Claytor. Kathy is a Chief Human Resources Officer leading HR over her career for companies including Delta Dental, Northwinds Technology, One Mind Health India, and other organizations in the financial services, technology, and government sectors. It seems she's done HR and led HR everywhere that you can imagine. So, on top of that, her passion for advancing the HR profession through certification and learning led her to join the Human Resources Certification Board, or as many of you will know it, HRCI, where she currently serves as HRCI Board Chair. Kathy has also been recognized as a top 100 global HR leader at the World HRD Congress in Mumbai, and recently as an HR Leader of Distinction by CHRO Today. Kathy, thank you for joining me. Thanks for being here.
Hey, Jason. Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
So we are going to start with getting to know a little bit more about you and about the work that you do. And so this is a little bit different because you're in kind of a bit of a transition. And so I'm going to ask you to share a couple of different things. Most recently, you just recently retired from the role of CHRO at Delta Dental. And so I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about that and the work you did there, and then also a little bit about what you are up to these days.
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks, Jason. So yeah, a little bit of a bittersweet kind of a situation in that I did retire. Loved working for Delta Dental. It's a terrific company, very mission focused, great culture, and so forth. And during my time there, I focused on things like workplace culture. I had the opportunity to build a wholly owned subsidiary in Chennai, India. I really focused on building out technology and being part of a team that built out tech for the organization as well as our subsidiary companies. We're at a time of growth. So we're growing through subsidiaries, growing through joint ventures, growing through acquisitions, all the while, keeping our focus on our workplace, and all the while keeping our focus on serving our customers and our mission, which is promoting oral health for all individuals kind of in our space. So loved that. Love leading HR, terrific executive team. Now I've transitioned, as you mentioned, to the Human Resource Certification Institute, HRCI for short, as you noted. I have the really fortune and honor to serve on the board, actually the board chair this year. And through the work of HRCI, really focused on continuing to elevate and educate the HR profession and HR in general. I think, the time is now for HR, and HRCI is, really, plugging in, elevating, leading through certifications, learning, and so forth. So, had a breadth of experiences, had a breadth of kind of different exposures, and loved every minute of it.
Mm. I have to imagine, and this is an entirely different podcast conversation, but it has to be a fascinating time for HRCI because I think about, as you mentioned, it is very much an opportunity. Like we've been kind of in the last 5 years, an opportunity for HR really to elevate, right? To sort of play a leading role. And it's fascinating with what happened through the pandemic and the disruption of work there, and then what's happening with the rise of AI and what that looks like, and highlighting very much this conversation about what work is uniquely human and not, and sort of thinking more broadly about it. I'd like to be a fly on the wall for some of those conversations internally about what that means in terms of education and certification for the HR profession. I imagine that is a pretty interesting. You're chairing the board on at an interesting point in history for HRCI, I would think.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting, I have to say. So, we're, I guess, kind of leading up to the pandemic, really focused on certifying HR professionals, providing learning, and being, a certification and learning organization when the pandemic hit, we know the story there. Workforces were significantly impacted, and HRCI sort of asked itself how it can continue to help provide learning experiences to HR professionals beyond certification. So HRCI introduced a series called Alchemizing HR that continues today, and really took a step back and looked at the profession. How else can we help? So through, I guess, post pandemic, really focused on creating a community of HR professionals where they can kind of connect and learn from each other, focused on building out AI tools, a chatbot, if you will, in partnership with Deloitte, which just recently rolled out, and also a learning academy for HR professionals. So the whole theme is learning, meeting folks where they are, whether it's certification, whether it's a weekly series, whether it's learning from each other as a community, or learning on your own through use of this AI driven chatbot. So, and all of that, as we know, kind of serves to kind of elevate the profession, provide folks who are really kind of out there in, respective workforces to have the tools that they need to provide service to their workforces, create a great culture, and also serve in leadership with um, the CEOs of their organization. Serve in leadership, have that, and I hate to use this term because it's really cliche, but that sort of a seat at the table. I don't like that, but anyway, I guess it's still in our
Yeah.
vernacular because I do think we have a seat at the table. So, really providing opportunities to give a focus to the important work that HR leaders do every day, and really help kind of drive and advance and drive the bottom line of the organizations that we work and serve in.
Well, it's important work, and I kudos and thank you for doing it, because as it seems to me, as I'm talking with those that are on the front lines doing that work right now, it's a heavy time to do it, right? There's change coming so quickly, and there's just a lot going on, and so keeping up with not only where you're at but where it's going is really important. So thank you for that.
Sure thing.
Like I said, we could talk about that all day, but I think that's like I said, maybe a future conversation we'll come back to. But for now, before we kind of dive into at least the conversation that we want to have today, I want to get a little bit of background. I always like to ask people a little bit about their origin story, kind of how you found your way into this work. And I think it's interesting timing now as you're, retiring from your day-to-day and transitioning into whatever's next for you. Where did it start? How did you find your way into this work in the first place?
Yeah, sure. Well, I guess many people have the same story. A number of years ago, many probably, I sort of stumbled into the profession. I didn't know a lot about HR. Hey, it's working with people. Oh, that sounds good, And I had an opportunity to kind of start as sort of an entry level, HR rep, and I found it fascinating and fun. One thing that I should say about me is that I am a voracious learner. I love to learn, and that's been one of my mantras throughout my career. Podcasting, listening to programs like yours, Jason, reading. Anything I can get my hands on, not just about HR, but really, about the world today. So, voracious learner. And I think in terms of my origin story, it really, there was a pivotal moment in my career somewhat early on where, and I'll never forget this. I was in a meeting with some executive leaders, and our chief technologist sort of walked into the room, and he said, I need some help opening up a wholly owned sub in Chennai, a tech sub, which would, support our operations onshore. Who wants to do this? He's very excited, take a step forward. Well, unbeknownst to me, all of my colleagues took a step back and sort of left me there. But that was okay. And I had the opportunity early on in my career to travel with our chief technology officer and others on the team who finally did raise their hand and um, form a wholly owned subsidiary in support of our onshore operations. Um, I learned so much about having a global mindset and the importance of that. I'll give you, I'll give you a short story. The first time I traveled to Chennai, I wanted to, kind of put my best foot forward as the people leader there. And I walked in the door, I arrived promptly at, 8:30, the normal start time that I would come in. And I was looking around, like, where is everybody? Don't they know that I'm coming? Uh, where could they be? I waited for 2 hours, in fact. People started drifting in around 10:30, and I thought, what's going on here? But then as I watched and spent time with the team, I realized that these folks work from 10:30 a.m. Indian time, in our case, to 10:30 p.m. I mean, they're actually working a lot more hours, but in terms of time zones and making sure that, you know, US based Eastern time is in alignment with the work that needs to be done, in India, they alter their schedules to really come in and be present when we needed them. And that sounds like a kind of a small moment, but it was really a pivotal moment, which really caused me to rethink everything in terms of kind of running a global operation, making sure that it's successful. So my origin story really is what about raising your hand, taking the risk, doing the hard work, doing the heavy lift to 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 feed, in my case, my need for learning, but more than that, to really understand workplaces around the world.
Yeah, there's some great lessons in that. I think that sometimes I don't know, it doesn't look I think when you are young and you're in that spot, sometimes you miss that raising your hand, taking on that project, particularly that thing that you're not sure you could do. But you're like, I'll figure it out if they'll give me a chance to do it. Like those are the experiences where if you're open and you're willing to learn and you're willing to take the risk and you're willing to kind of extend yourself a little bit, can really, really accelerate your career in a lot of ways. And so that's pretty awesome to have had that experience that early on, right? What
Yeah.
a cool opportunity.
And well, exactly. And I learned so much about cultural alignment, making sure
Mm.
that, in the US, I think sometimes we have the tendency to be very US focused, view things through our lens, i.e., where is everybody first thing in the morning? And instead, really making sure that you have our eye on, the broader view, the less US centric, the more global kind of mindset of view.
Yeah. Well, and the more, I mean, at least I have found too, the more global your perspective, the more you can, like, it means you have to sort of like be able to step into another cultural lens and kind of view your situation. That helps you here too. Even in the US, I think we're a
Absolutely.
little myopic in not being able to see other cultural perspectives, and that global perspective really, when you have that global experience, it really jars you out of sort of the silos you're stuck in or the lenses that you can only see through that one lens. It's really valuable experience.
Exactly. Another thing I learned, Jason, was to make sure that I understand the conversation that's taken place, by first listening and then kind of repeating what I thought I heard to make sure that, I was really understanding kind of the point of the conversation and, if there are any takeaways or activities or what have you. So just doing a check-in, that simple thing. This is what I heard you say. Are we, on the same page? Yes. And if we're not, let's talk about it. So that experience has really helped me in, my future career. Yes.
I'm sure that it has. Well, I want to transition a little bit here, and I guess we're already kind of off to the races on this a little bit because as you and I were connecting and talking about like what what could we talk about in our podcast conversation, as we were talking through it, it felt like, well, let me back up. The way that what prompted me to reach out is I had seen a LinkedIn post where you had shared that you had been recognized for, you had gotten this nice recognition from HRO Today as HR Leader of Distinction. And in your post, you were very thoughtful in saying, a lot of this is due to all these mentors that I've had throughout my career. And you were thanking the mentors that have supported you along the way. And as we were talking about that, we kind of arrived at a point of like, hey, wouldn't it be interesting? Like you're kind of at a perfect point to talk about and reflect on some of the things that you learned and some of the things that were important in your career. And I think given the seat that you sit in with HRCI and you're shaping that narrative, we wanted to have a conversation about kind of where, sort of Kathy's take on, I guess, the evolution of the CHRO role and maybe help share kind of some things that you've learned that might be helpful to those that are on the path to either get there or maybe earlier in that journey. And so I'm very excited to have this conversation so that we can learn from your experience. I think let's start with, because I mentioned it from the post, the idea of mentors, because I think, and not just the idea, but I guess the practice of mentors, because you hear people, at least my experience is I hear people talk about mentors, or they wish they had more mentors, or, you kind of look back. And a lot of times I think people look back and some of the mentors that shaped them sort of almost happened some by accident, right? They'll say, oh, this person taught me a lot, but it was someone who was their boss or someone who they happened to bump into. But I sense from our conversation that you were maybe a little bit more intentional and thoughtful over the course of your career about those mentor relationships, finding, identifying, inviting them in. So I am curious, let's start and talk a little bit about that, because I think that would be really useful for I guess you don't have to be in HR for this to be valuable. I think mentors are super valuable, but how did you think about, or at what point did you become, I guess, kind of more intentional about your desire for mentorship, and how did you go about finding mentors that ended up being really helpful?
Yeah, great question. And mentors have been critically important in kind of my evolution. I guess I'll kind of go back to my origin story about India. I really was very excited for the opportunity, but knew very little. So I kind of set off on a journey to sort of see through my LinkedIn contacts, through HRCI, through other organizations, through my network and my network's network, who are the people that could really advise me on on operating at a global level, and I will never forget, I found a woman who is a mentor and a dear friend. Her name is Nita Woodard. Some of you, in the audience you may know her. Others may know Nina as well. She actually opened the SHRM office in Mumbai, and I thought, oh, I have to talk to Nina. And so through my reach out to her, she taught me so much. And I said to her at one point in the conversation, would you please mentor me, because I need to I need to get your wisdom. I need to learn from you. And she of course said yes. And through Nina, she really taught me how to kind of make the ask. If you find someone that you feel like you could learn from, I found that it really is a compliment to that person when you ask them to mentor you. It says that you value their experience, that you could benefit from, learning from them. And, and I've asked many people over the course of my career, hey, would you mentor me in this certain topic? And they've all, happily, they've all told me yes. And all of these people are still on my network today. A fellow by the name of David Miles helped also mentor me from a global HR perspective. Here onshore, I've had many, many mentors whom I've asked. An individual who's since retired, but he was one of our board chairs. And I said, hey, Tom, would you just mentor me a little bit? Because I wanted to learn more. I was getting more involved in some boards of directors. And I just wanted to learn kind of from his view as a board chair, what his expectations would be for a CHRO. And so in the course of that relationship, he, shared some information with me, which help me kind of continue to elevate to the board level. What are his expectations as a CHRO? What is he looking for from me? And he would pull me aside, after a board meeting or what have you. Hey, Kathy, you did a great job. Next time you should think about including this in addition to, kind of what you said. The board is seeking, information and your insights at a very strategic, business focused level. They're less interested in some of the detail. They're more interested in a higher level perspective. So, my friend and mentor to this day, Tom, really helped me understand some of those board relationships, the governance kind of aspects, working with the board, and what my role, really should be as a CHRO. And wow, if another step along the way, if Tom really hadn't given me his, honest opinion and expectation, I might not have had opportunities in the future. Gosh, the list goes on, Jason. I could
Yeah.
talk for a long time about
Well,
mentorship.
let's be really tactical about, so if someone is listening who, I is, motivated, wants to develop in their career, and they feel like, I mean, one of the things that I remember sort of from being an HR leader is that, and this is the thing, is it gets really lonely. Like, every time you get promoted, there's fewer people internally who can even can mentor you in the way that you want, probably. And there's obviously always political things in the water, right? So a lot of times, every time the higher up you get, the more you want to look outside the organization, often for mentorship, not always. But you want to be able to have conversations to help you develop and pull you up and develop those skills. I am curious, you said you kind of scanned for, you looked LinkedIn, you looked elsewhere for people who you seemed to have the thing or had the skill that they could teach you. How did you go about, I guess, two questions. One is, how did you go about, you said you learned how to make the ask. What does that sound like? Number one. And number two, when you make those asks, what kinds of questions do they generally ask you before they agree to say yes? Because I suspect there are usually a few things that you should be prepared to offer up, or some questions you should be prepared to answer when you're asking somebody to be a mentor for you.
Right, sure. Well, and I'll start by saying that mentorship could be, a series of three conversations over a cup of coffee, virtually or in
Yep.
person, or it could be, a long-term, long-lasting relationship, like my relationship with Nina or Tom. So when I think about making an ask, number one, as I said, it's because I respect and value this person very, very much. Um, and number two, I always say, hey, could we grab coffee? And so I'm not asking for, 6 months worth of their time. I'm not asking for a lifelong relationship or anything like that. I'm asking for coffee and the chance to learn from them, a couple times. And if we hit it off, and I'm grateful and thankful to say that as I've started that way, we've always, hit it off in these mentor relationships. But it usually looks like, hey, can we have coffee? Because I want to learn from you. And always the answer has been yes.
Hmm. That's a really good. Keep it simple, keep it small initially. And it is surprising. I think people, that is one of the things that I would sort of offer up is I've been shocked by how frequently people do say yes when you ask. And the thing that gets in most people's way is they assume that person is too busy or too important or too whatever. And so they never make the ask. It's not that they can't find the mentor, it's just they never engage because they have all the assumptions about them not being available. So take the chance and ask, because the worst
Yes.
thing that can happen is they say, I would really love to, but I don't have time right now. Like that is the worst outcome. And it's like, okay, great. Now I know it. Could I circle back in 6 months? And they'll
Right.
probably say, yes, absolutely reach back out. And then you go to the next person on your list, right? So
Exactly.
make the ask, right? Make
Yes.
the ask, make the invitation. You'll be shocked how often the answer will be yes. So
Exactly.
find some mentors. That's number one. Find some mentors.
Yes. And I would also add, once you've been in a situation of having been mentored, be sure to pay it forward. So even if you're early in your career and you've engaged with a mentor that you've sought out, had coffee with, what have you, there's always that kind of next level coming up. And I try to keep in mind I wouldn't be where I am without mentorship of this terrific group of folks. Make sure to pay it forward, regardless of the level. If it's a recent college graduate thinking about HR as a profession, say yes, have the cup of coffee.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Right. Be conscious of just being available. I love that. All right. So I am curious your perspective on, right, because I would assume both through your role being in the seat of the CHRO, but also I'm sure you hear lots of conversations and feedback through the HRCI organization. What do you think are, if someone is thinking about, hey, I really want to position myself to be a CHRO, or they're on that journey, what would you say are the top sort of the key skills that a modern CHRO needs to have today, given kind of the world that we live in?
Right. Great question. And, I love the way you use the term modern CHRO because, things have changed, as we know, kind of significantly. What we knew before is not what is needed, for the modern CHRO. I think one thing that stepping into, my first CHRO role was learning the financials. I and that sounds pretty basic. I, was educated, to focus on general sort of business topics, some HR and so forth, but I didn't spend enough time learning about financials. Didn't have an interest. That wasn't going to be my profession. And so, okay, someone else will, figure that out. Well, I I found that I really lacked some of those, basic financial skills. I need as a CHRO to be in a position of at least being conversant with my CFO and other financial folks who are, looking at the business from a financial and strategic lens, and being in a position of having information, being conversant, knowing what drives the business from a financial and strategy perspective, and hopefully putting myself in alignment with the CFO. And if not alignment, then in some cases, offering up, a differing opinion, shall we just say, when you're talking. But I think the point is know the financials, be conversant at least, know what drives the business. Number one, that's those are table stakes of which I did not have and really needed really needed to sit down with the books and kind of be conversant there. I also spoke about knowing what drives the business, what kind of results we're looking for from a strategy perspective, so that I then know how to position the workforce, what skill sets I'm going to be looking for, not just now, but in the future. What is the business going to look like? in a year from now? What's the business going to look like in 5 years from now? And what do I need to do to start preparing my workforce? What do I need to do to start, recruitment, if that's what's needed? And, just understanding the business deeply. And so I kind of go back to my point of I am a voracious learner. Uh, and I have really kind of stuck with that, approach to learn everything that I could possibly learn. I would also say, put in the time. You really need to spend time building relationships. Need to spend time, as I, talked about, learning the business. Need to really spend time understanding all levels. So spending time, of course, with my boss, CEO, making sure that I'm in alignment with him or her in conversations and expectations. So just making sure that in alignment. I think obviously, going back to some of the hard skills, tech skills and data literacy, critically important. And, from a tech perspective, not just and in a data perspective also, not just looking at tech and data to sort of tell me the here and now. We know that anybody can get that information using tech, using data to create kind of the future state or future states for the organization, so I can then position myself to focus on workforce, workplace transformation, change and change management. So making sure that I'm proficient in kind of forward and future looking at the business, which goes back to the financial literacy piece. It all sort of links together. Another kind of softer skill that really is just now being talked about, I think, and that is using your influencing skills. Influencing comes in a lot of different shapes. How do you influence what you do? It's just like, talking about mentoring. How do you do that? Well, using your influencing skills to drive the business, to speak on behalf of your workforce, make sure that those voices are heard, using influencing skills at all, levels within the organization to make sure we have business success, to make sure we have a great culture, great workplace, all the skills that are needed. And, I think those are really, really important as well. We're talking about change and change management,
Right.
moving fast and agilely as well, and just understanding how to pick up the pace and keep the pace going, motivate your team members to do that.
I'm struck by a couple of things as I'm listening to you unpack this. One is, I just want to call this out if you're listening from an HR perspective, as an HR pro, if you've grown up in the business, it always strikes me, and this really hit me too as I was sort of evolving in my career, that the things you described about how to be a CHRO or know the business, build relationships, influence skills, know the financials, financial literacy, right? You were talking about technology in general. And what I would like to point out is none of those, in any of that, you didn't say get much, much deeper core expertise on every HR nook and cranny. You didn't say like become an expert in compliance, because I think that's one of the things that I find challenging, or I think a lot of HR folks find challenging with the transition, is that what makes you successful early in your career, and this isn't just HR, by the way, this is everywhere, but what makes you successful when you're an individual contributor or a manager is a very different game than once you become the executive leader of a function, because at that point you're operating sort of in an organizational capacity, and all of these skills become your purview is for the organization, not just your department, right? You are the connective, kind of strategic connective tissue between what HR does and whether the business succeeds. So I just think it's interesting to call that out for people, that the skills that you need to succeed when you become a CHRO are probably very different than the skills it took you to get there. So that's an important developmental context, and where mentors and learning becomes really important. So I appreciate that. The other thing I'm curious about and just kind of as a follow-up, when you talk about technology today, in particular data fluency, it seems to me, and I guess I just want your reaction to this, that even in the conversations I've been having with HR leaders about AI and thinking about tech and AI and how they are responding to the opportunities and threats of AI, when I have those conversations, most of their thinking about it at this point is entirely focused on what AI can do for HR. And I mean HR process, like what it can make easier and faster and sort of make maybe it easier for employees to interact with HR. And it seems to me like this is a representation of kind of one of the issues and frustrations that executives have with HR is like, wait a minute, if you want a seat at the table as a strategic participant, why aren't you thinking about work across the enterprise? Like, why aren't we thinking about the HR leader, I would think, and their team should be the one thinking about how can we deploy HR or AI tools to help them work more effectively, to help them collaborate more effectively, to sort of amplify their ability to do the things they're uniquely gifted at. And so I'm wondering, like, if that resonates with you in terms of, I think there's a sort of, we need to call up our HR leaders to a broader way of thinking about technology and about their role in the organization as AI comes in, because I think they're almost going to have a dual role between tech and sort of, it's like the human tech interface is going to become really important. And I don't think that sits in HR or IT. I think it sits somewhere in between, is going to require a different kind of collaboration, it feels like.
Right. Well, I I hadn't thought about it the way you described it, that HR folks, it's where the comfort spot is, right?
Right.
Really focused on AI and AI tech and so forth, related only to HR. But you're exactly right. And thank you for raising that, because we really need to focus on driving AI adoption in whatever your, chosen field is within an organization, driving the capabilities within each area, but take a step up above
Yep.
that even. We really need to focus on how we can advance as a business and be successful as a company and remain competitive,
Right.
leveraging AI from an overarching kind of a standpoint. And as I was looking forward to and thinking about our conversation today, I started thinking about this whole description of talent and skills. I mean, we need to start thinking about talent and skills in a completely different way. We need to sort of say, you know, okay, if we're using AI, okay, if we're using robotics, that's part of the talent picture for, us as CHROs, as business leaders, and so forth. And we need the time is yesterday, actually, to
Yeah.
really lead into this conversation in terms of how we're moving the organization forward, how we're leveraging that from a broad workforce and talent perspective. What skills are I was talking about the tech and data, sort of looking to the future. What skills are going to be needed, for the future to run the business and remain competitive? Well, what skills then of that skill set that are needed can be performed by AI, what can be performed by robots, what can be performed by, other kind of non-humans. That sounds weird. Um,
Yep.
but others you can help drive the business. And
Yep.
I think as HR leaders have an obligation. I mean, this is our sweet spot right now, which is driving transformation, um, driving, being agile, kind of helping the organization kind of move through this to push forward and see talent. What does talent mean? What skills are needed? And
Yep.
what needs to play where to move things forward.
Yeah.
This is us. Grab hold
That's
of it.
right. Well, and add on things you mentioned earlier, right? Change readiness and change management. If you think about the transition, helping people, like one of the biggest barriers that organizations I think have today with AI is resistance right? On the part, or either resistance or a lack of skill or ability. Those both sound like HR problems to solve, right? They're
Indeed.
people problems. And so I think it's just there's a call to sort of, I think more broadly about the role of human resources and think about it maybe as talent is within that,
Yes.
performance is within that, right? The organization moving forward in the future, performance and talent are, to your point, going to look very different. And so that's going to require a different kind of leader, different kind of thinking. So
Absolutely.
really important. So I love that. That's a thank you for that. I'm going to ask you one more quick thought on, as you were reflecting, as you're at the sort of, as you are at this point in your career and reflecting back, what one piece of advice would you give your younger professional self, knowing that, eventually you were headed towards an executive role, right? What advice would you give your younger self about how to prepare yourself for what it will look like to succeed as an executive in the future?
Only one, Jason?
Only one. What's the most important? What was the most poignant?
Um, well, let's see. From a personal standpoint, I would say ask for what you want. From a personal career standpoint, this is going to sound a little bit self-serving, right? But I think oftentimes in HR, we are, looking at and supporting others. We don't pay attention to kind of what we need for our self to advance our career and so forth. So I would say ask for what you want. And what I mean by that is in my first CHRO role, as I first moved, I was sitting right here at a VP level, and I thought, gosh, doesn't my boss know that I want to be a CHRO? Doesn't he know? He should know that. Anybody would want that, wouldn't they? Well, it turns out that you know, my boss didn't necessarily know. And
Yeah.
so guess what? And I'm very thankful that, my boss felt confident in me. I'm thankful that I had the skill set to kind of move to the next level. So let's start there because I think the onus is on us to make sure that we've done our part, raising our hand, we're being voracious learners, and we're doing all the things. But at the end of the day, I would say ask for what you want. And when I asked to be moved to CHRO, guess what? My boss said, yes, okay, congratulations.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was something on his radar. But you know,
Yeah. Got to ask,
just
got to
gotta
advocate.
ask. Yeah, gotta advocate
Yeah.
for yourself. Oftentimes we're advocating for others. Sometimes you gotta advocate for yourself.
That's great advice. Great advice. Thank you. Thank you. All right. So one question that as we wrap up, I ask everyone a question. I'm particularly interested in your view on this because you are actively shaping this, I think, as we speak through your work with the HRCI board. But when you think about work, capital W work, so work broadly, right, across the world, in 5 years' time, so 5 years from now, what is one thing you hope will be different about work than it is today?
So we touched on it just a little bit in some of our earlier conversations, but I hope that there would be more, and I call this kind of fluidity in skill sets. And what I mean by that is oftentimes, in our kind of HR sort of realm, we're sort of categorizing people in these sort of boxes and these roles. Oh, I'm an HR generalist, for example. These are the things I'm supposed to do as HR generalist. Oh, I'm a financial analyst. These are the things I'm supposed to do. I would like to see more fluidity in terms of the skill sets that are needed. I'd like to see more agileness in being able to move people and skill sets, and sometimes, AI and robots too, but, the fluidity to be able to move skill sets, people, and so forth around to rise up and be kind of their best self, the best version of themselves, and the spot where they can lend their skills, kind of to advance the organization, the spot where they can thrive, and in that best self. Maybe they're doing something for 6 months and then they go on to kind of do something else that they really want to learn about or want to do, kind of rise up. So I'd like to see us think about skills, talent, workforce in a more fluid sort of manner to kind of get the job done, to work agilely, to support transformations that are needed, and to take advantage of the new ways of working and the new sources of talent that we know are there that we just really need to leverage.
I love that. You know what it comes to mind for me is I'm a sports guy, and what I think of is, at least what I think I just heard you say, is sort of like an evolution of what's like happened in basketball. Like when I was playing basketball, I'm getting old enough now. When I played basketball, there were very specific positions. I am a tall guy, so I was instantly a post player. And so I was taught to play basketball with my back to the basket. Run down, put your back to the basket, stand on the post. That's all I learned. I knew how to do post moves. That's it. They didn't worry about me learning how to dribble. They didn't really, they gave up on that at some point. So I could only do that, right? That is the HR generalist and the financial analyst. Whereas today, the game has evolved to this 5-out offense. Most people play this sort of open offense where everybody is developed. At least as a youth, you're developed to play every place. Wherever on the floor you happen to be, you might find yourself facing the basket. You might find yourself under the basket. Sure, if you're taller, you're probably going to play the taller guy on defense because of your natural capabilities. But you might also be shooting 3-pointers on the other end because you learned how to do that and you have that skill. And so it feels like we need more of a fluid 5-out offense is what I'm hearing you say in the workforce, which is going to require us as HR to let go of a lot of our favorite stuff, right?
Yes.
Job descriptions and some of the way we do performance is going to have to go out the window and be replaced with something better and different. So I love that. I look forward to seeing how that evolves. And perhaps that'll be a future conversation we can have, Kathy. So as we wrap up, I like to sort of close out with a one-word checkout. So in one word, Kathy, how are you feeling as we wrap up our conversation today?
Just one word. That's really hard. I would say excited.
And for me, I will offer inspired. Inspired. So thank you for that. Thank you for joining me. This was a really fun conversation. I feel like we probably could have done another hour. You have so much to share and so much, I think, to offer. And so maybe there'll be a part 2 down the road, Kathy, as you continue to do your work. We'll come back and do this again. But in the interim, if people want to connect with you, if they would like to sort of get in your network, perhaps now somebody's going to reach out and say, hey, Kathy, will you mentor me? I don't know, but where can they find you? What's the best way to connect?
Yeah, sure thing. So you can find me on LinkedIn. It's real simple. Kathy Claytor. You can also find me. I have a small website, kathyclaytor.com. Pretty simple. And then you can access my email through my website. So
cool. Well, we will include
easy.
We'll include both of those in the show notes so people can find you and connect with you. Kathy, this was a delight. Thank you for all you're doing. Thank you for the work you're doing with HRCI. That's important work. So really appreciate you.
Well, thank you, Jason. I loved being here. Great conversation. You're right. We could go on for another hour.
Easily.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. Anytime. And like I said, we'll part 2 down the road. We'll just park that for right now. So I want to say thank you also for listening. I hope you can take back some of these learnings from what Kathy offered us today. I mean, one, finding a mentor is easier than you might think. You just have to find people you admire and have the courage to reach out and ask them to have a coffee and share some of what they've learned. You'll be shocked how many times they will say yes. And also, I think Kathy offered us such a great challenge, invitation to think different, to think more broadly about how HR is changing, what it means to lead a modern HR organization, and to take back some really great nuggets on how to elevate your role in your game as an HR leader. So take those, put them to work, and please remember to check in with the people that matter most to you. Might be the most important thing you can do today. Until next time.